This Notebook LM video explores how the Gnostics mounted one of history's most radical spiritual rebellions, challenging both cosmic and earthly authority. They asked whether the world was truly a divine gift or instead a prison. They believed the material world was created not by the supreme God but by a flawed Demiurge, a jailer rather than a benevolent father.
All right, let's get right into it. You know, we sometimes think of ancient beliefs as, well, kind of dusty and irrelevant, but Gnosticism, it was anything but. This was a firebrand movement, really one of history's most radical challenges to the whole idea of authority, from the top of the cosmos all the way down to your local community. And that's the rebellion we're going to unpack right now.
To really get the Gnostics, you have to start with their single most explosive question. I want you to forget everything you might have learned about a loving, all-powerful creator, just for a second, and ask yourself this. What if this reality, the world you see and touch every day, what if it isn't a gift, but a cage? That one idea right there is the key that unlocks their entire way of thinking.
You see, for the Gnostics, the rebellion didn't start on the streets. It started in the stars. They basically argued that if you want to find the flaw in earthly power, you have to look up first and find the flaw in the so-called authority of creation itself.
And at the very center of this cosmic con job is a figure they called the Demiurge. Now here's the kicker. This is not the true ultimate God, not even close. He's more like a clumsy imitation, a lesser being who, kinda by accident, cobbled together our material world. And for the Gnostics, that didn't make him a benevolent father. It made him the warden of a prison.
So the Demiurge makes this grand declaration, a line you might even recognize from the Old Testament. But what the Gnostics did with it was just brilliant, a total act of subversion. For them, this wasn't a statement of ultimate power. Oh no, it was proof of his ultimate ignorance. Think about it. A truly supreme being would know about the infinite realms beyond its own. By declaring himself the one and only, the Demiurge basically just exposed how limited he really was. And this, wow, this table just lays out their whole system of rebellion perfectly. Way at the top, you have the true supreme God, hidden, perfect, and totally transcendent. That's the only real source of legitimacy. Then you step down to the flawed Demiurge, our warden, whose very existence pulls the rug out from under the traditional creator God. Below him are his enforcers, the archons, which means that any earthly government, political, religious, you name it, is fundamentally corrupt. And the material world itself, it's the prison. So the bottom line is, following the rules of this world is just doing what your jailers tell you to do.
Okay, so if the world's a prison, the big question is, how do you get out? Well, the Gnostics had an answer, and they argued the key wasn't in some sacred scroll or in the hands of a priest. Nope. The key was already inside you.
And that key has a name, gnosis. Now this isn't the kind of knowledge you get from studying books. It's more like a lightning flash, a sudden, deep, personal realization that there's a divine spark trapped inside your physical body. It's that aha moment when the prisoner suddenly remembers they're not from the prison at all.
And this is where the Gnostics really set themselves on a collision course with the emerging mainstream church. The Gnostic path, gnosis, was all about enlightenment and finding authority within yourself. But the other path, pistis, which just means faith, demanded obedience. Obedience to an external authority like scriptures and clergy, where salvation was something that was handed to you by someone else.
Let's break that down even more, because it's so important. For the Gnostic, truth is an inside job. It comes from direct, mystical insight. Salvation is waking up to who you really are. You don't need a middleman. But for the proto-orthodox, no way. Truth is external. It's in the Bible, in tradition. Salvation comes from obedience and faith in things that happened in history. And intermediaries like priests and bishops, absolutely essential. You see, these aren't just small disagreements. They are two completely different operating systems for how to be religious.
Right, so this wasn't just a bunch of abstract philosophy. These ideas led to a very real, very practical rebellion against the power structures of the early church. They didn't just question the walls of the cosmos, they started knocking down the walls of the actual institution.
And their practices were just as wild as their beliefs. I mean, they completely refused to have a permanent priest class. Get this, in their meetings, they would cast lots, basically draw straws, to decide who would be the priest or bishop for that day. It was totally fluid. And maybe most radical of all, they elevated women to positions of genuine authority, allowing them to teach, to lead discussions, and even perform rituals like baptism, all things that were strictly forbidden for women in the orthodox structure. And you can just feel the shock and horror from the establishment in this quote from the Church Father Tertullian. He saw their democratic egalitarian meetings and called them an overthrow of discipline. You can just hear the panic in his voice, can't you? It shows just how threatening this idea of radical equality really was to the rigid top-down order he was trying to build.
What's so great about this slide is how it just lays out the two competing visions side by side. It was a total showdown. On one side, you've got the Gnostic model, equality, flexible roles, and really valuing what an individual brings to the table. And on the other, the proto-orthodox model, a rigid pyramid of power, a demand for everyone to believe the same thing, and the total exclusion of women from leadership. This wasn't just a debate, it was a collision of two completely different futures for the community.
So, what happened to this rebellion? Well, as you might guess, Gnosticism was eventually hunted down and suppressed as a heresy. But its central challenge, its core question about power, that never really went away. Its legacy is like an echo that you can still hear today.
If you take just one thing away from all of this, let it be this right here. The entire Gnostic saga boils down to one fundamental choice. Where do you find truth? Is spiritual authority found within yourself through direct personal knowledge, gnosis? Or is it something granted to you by an external institution that demands your faith and your obedience?
At the end of the day, the Gnostic legacy is this incredibly powerful declaration of spiritual independence. It's the radical idea that you, yes, you, contain a spark of the divine. And because of that, no institution, no priest, no bishop, no sacred book has the final say over your connection to the ultimate. You just don't need a middleman.
And that leaves us with a question that is just as sharp and relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. In our own lives, totally surrounded by institutions of every kind, religious, political, social, where do we ultimately decide true authority lies? Is it something we look for out there, or is it something we have to awaken in here?